Hello and welcome back to South Park Explained on No Bullshit. Today we're doing another flashback episode. This time we're going all the way back to season 11, its premiere episode, which was called With Apologies to Jesse Jackson. Although released over a decade ago in 2007, this episode has recently become more relevant than ever. For starters, the story starts off with Randy Marsh accidentally saying the N-word on national television. And despite using the actual racial slur repeatedly in this episode, South Park surprisingly received very little pushback when this originally aired. But in today's current politically correct climate, we all know this would have went down much differently if it happened in 2019. For example, YouTube star PewDiePie got into a whole world of trouble for accidentally saying this term during a live gaming session, this resulting in him losing his YouTube series. And all the left and the SJWs and the mainstream media, they all came after PewDiePie too, our guy. They were out for blood, and even the once respected Wall Street Journal attacked Pewds, virtually asking for him to be fired, shamed, and stripped of everything he's got. This obviously didn't work out for them though. Not only has the Wall Street Journal been going downhill ever since this, but also PewDiePie is now bigger than ever, and he's more base than ever too, because of the left-wing attacks on him. But there's an even bigger, more recent story involving the N-word, which made me think of this South Park episode specifically. Forgive me for this drawn-out intro here, but I can't go on without mentioning the recent deplatforming and SJW attacks against another YouTuber, Sargon of Akkad. Now, I of course have had my differences with the guy over the years, even making a short series of videos about his recent decline this time last year, but I would never wish this kind of treatment upon Sargon, or anyone, not even my worst enemies. You see, recently in early December, Sargon was booted off of Patreon, the creator support website, on which he had a very active and successful account. And why did Patreon ban Sargon, you might ask? Well, they came across an earlier video of him saying the N-word. That's right, Sargon lost thousands of dollars of monthly income, money that feeds his family and children, all because he said the wrong word at the wrong time. Sounds pretty ridiculous, but as we all know, the N-word is a common excuse leftists and PC people will use to try and attack dissidents and public speakers they don't like. Now, with all that said, I think you can see why this South Park episode is more relevant now than ever. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this story and see what this episode's all about. As I said before, this one starts off with Randy Marsh accidentally saying the N-word on live TV. What happens is Randy is on a game show called Wheel of Fortune, you know, with Pat Sajak. And well, Randy's made it to the last round and he has to guess what this word is by filling in the blanks. There's even a funny clue for the puzzle that says, people who annoy you. Naturally, Randy thinks of the most obvious answer to this. I mean, it's N-blank-G-G-E-R-S. So, guessing that this was the N-word isn't that big of a stretch, even if it does have that pretty offensive clue. So, even though Randy hesitates at first here, he eventually blurts out the N-word as his guess. Unfortunately though, the answer was actually naggers, like people who nag you. And it looks like Randy is going to have some explaining to do after this performance. And what I love the most about this setup here was the innocence with which Randy says the N-word. He shouts it out on TV smiling and thinking he's going to win some money, only to fail oh so hard. The show within the show, Wheel of Fortune, gets cut off the air, but also Randy's family is very embarrassed for him. Not to mention, everyone in town is about to outcast the guy for saying the unspeakable. And that's why I think this is a good comparison to PewDiePie and Sargon's uses of the word as well. None of these characters or creators were saying the term in a racist or offensive way. Not really. Sure, one can argue that saying the N-word at all ever is offensive, and I understand the history and sensitivity surrounding the word too, but you also must admit that these situations are much different than, say, using the term directly at a black person as an insult. Context matters if you ask me, but as we'll soon find out, many others don't care much about this. Even saying the word by accident can produce terrible results for anyone who's not black, of course. And ironically enough, black people say the term all the time too, on TV, in their songs, movies, and everything, which makes this whole N-word situation even more confusing and frustrating. On the way home, Randy tries to explain that he only said the word because he thought he was going to win money, thinking that's a proper excuse. Then the next day at school, Randy's son Stan has to deal with some more of the fallout. Everyone in town saw the show after all, and clips of it have been playing all day on TV and on YouTube. Stan tries to brush things off and move on at school, but there's one problem. Token, the black kid, is at school and he could be really mad about this, or so the boys think. Stan decides to get in front of this and explain things to Token right away. Stan tells him how his dad is not racist, he's just stupid, and then he tries to play off the whole N-word thing as not being a big deal. Token begs to differ though, saying it is a big deal, and Stan will never know how he and his family feel when this term comes up. This confrontation prompts Cartman to go off and hype things up even more. He runs around school screaming race war, acting like there's some kind of big fight fight coming, which is absolutely hilarious.
Race war! Race war! Race war! Race war's on, everybody! It's going down! Shit is going down!
Next, Randy makes a move to try and restore his reputation. His plan is to apologize to Reverend Jesse Jackson, like what it says in this episode's title. And for those who don't know, Jesse Jackson is an American civil rights activist, a Baptist minister, and politician. He was a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1984 and 88, and he served as a shadow U.S. Senator for Washington, D.C. from 91 to 97. And since the 90s, Jackson has remained pretty relevant too, moving away from direct politics and opting for more of a black lobbyist role, working with the NAACP and stuff. Many might even unironically think Jesse Jackson is a representative of black people, which is something this South Park episode jokes about later on too. Here though, Randy is apologizing to Jackson for his N-word debacle, and Jesse, well, he's milking this moment for all it's worth, even getting Randy to literally kiss his ass in a picture, which they have a photographer for and everything, and present this to the press for the whole world to see.
Kiss it. Huh? Apologize. Kiss it. You want me to kiss your... That's right, apologize.
The next day at school, Stan tries to again persuade Token into thinking everything is alright now. Token isn't sold on this yet though, even saying another classic line here, which is, Jesse Jackson is not the emperor of all black people, which prompts Stan to reply with, he told my dad he was. The next scene at school begins with this episode's B story, which although a little off and odd and down the beaten path from this N-word stuff, well, it still proves to be absolutely hilarious. Following the Wheel of Fortune debacle, the school decides to try and bring in a speaker to talk to the kids about word choices and being sensitive to others. To do this motivational type speech, South Park brings in a little person who has dealt with abusive words before in his life for being so small. But unfortunately, Cartman doesn't even let the little guy speak, because as soon as he walks into the room, Cartman just starts laughing and laughing very loud and uncontrollably. The speaker tries to play it cool and let Cartman just calm down on his own, but Eric's laughing just gets worse and worse, which makes me want to laugh too. Next, Randy is walking around town and he comes across a comedy club. Seeing there's an African American performing there, Randy decides to check it out, probably in an effort to not seem so anti-black and racist. Things don't go too well in there though, because after a few jokes, the black comedian actually recognizes Randy from his Wheel of Fortune screw-up, even saying, hey, look everyone, it's the N-word guy. And next thing you know, everyone in the room is calling him that. Randy leaves, but even people on the street start calling him this phrase too. And here it's pretty clear that South Park is starting to do a little switcheroo on this term. This racial slur, which was once used to demean black people, is now actually being used to demean white people, just in a different way. They even end this sequence with Randy getting kicked out of a convenience store after the worker calls him an N-word guy with a hard R and everything. Back at school, Cartman gets confronted by the little person speaker again. Things don't go too well for the little guy though, as Cartman just laughs in his face once again. But this time, the speaker, whose name is Dr. Nelson, well, he starts to get a little pissed, even cursing at Eric in front of the principal. He immediately backs off though, but this situation won't end here. Randy next goes to a beat poetry session, trying to express his feelings of angst regarding this whole Wheel of Fortune mishap. This is also just a good goof on silly poetry like this. You know, open mic sessions, something you might see in a city or at a local coffee shop or something. They're usually really lame. At school again, Stan tries to identify with Token, saying he now understands him after seeing the little person give his speech. This prompts Token to sarcastically reply saying, so blacks are like midgets? Thus showing Stan doesn't get this once again. Dr. Nelson quickly comes back in after this, still trying to get through to Eric Cartman. He has a new plan now though. The little speaker rounds up the kids and tells them to call Eric Fatso when he comes into the gym. This is supposed to make Cartman see what it's like to be made fun of, and it actually works for a minute. When all the kids call Eric fat, he gets pissed off for a sec, but it's short-lived as he quickly starts laughing again when Nelson walks back into the room. Cartman even makes a point to notice that Dr. Nelson is wearing little suspenders now, which you have to admit look really funny on this little guy, at least a little bit, pun intended.
What the hell is going on? Now you know how it feels.
Next, Randy tries once again to clear his name, this time even starting a charity for black people. He is desperate to get people to stop calling him an N-word guy, much like how black people once fought to stop being called the N-word themselves. Randy even goes on to rant about how this term brings up a dark part of his past, something in his history which he can't stand to be reminded of over and over again. Sound familiar? Well, that's because Randy is actually accidentally describing how black people don't like hearing the N-word themselves. It reminds them of their past and how past generations of American blacks blacks had troubling and bad things that happened to them. On his way out of that speech, Randy gets harassed by some rednecks. But instead of being racist and intolerant like how you might think, these rednecks are actually anti-racist, and they're going after Randy for using the N-word on Wheel of Fortune. But before they can corner Randy, he gets some help from unexpected guests. Other N-word guys led by Michael Richards from Seinfeld rescue Randy and scare the rednecks off. Michael Richards, of course, was best known for his role as Kramer on Seinfeld, the very popular NBC sitcom. But years after that show's finale, around the time of this South Park episode in 2007, well, Richards had a real N-word controversy of his own. He ended up saying the term at his own stand-up show, which was at a Laugh Factory very similar to the one earlier in the South Park episode. Richards had a heckler that night, and in a panicked effort to try and be funny, he called them this racial slur and almost ruined his whole career. Next, another N-word guy we meet in this sequence is Mark Fuhrman, one of the police investigators during the O.J. Simpson trials from the 1990s. O.J. Simpson, of course, was famous for getting acquitted for murder back then, and many people blame part of that on Mark Fuhrman, who was caught saying the N-word repeatedly in his career and during that case, which really didn't help things with the jury. And now, seeing these other examples, which admittedly are much worse than Randy's from South Park, well, they just go to show where South Park got their ideas from for this story. And they're not defending the guys at all either, and neither am I. They all screwed up, sure, but it is funny to see how controversial a simple term like the N-word can be. I think it's the political correctness of it all that fascinates us and South Park, and that's what makes this bit so funny too. Back at school, Stan gets fed up with Token and demands to know why he's still angry. The two are interrupted though by Butters, who tells them Cartman is going to fight Dr. Nelson in the town's park. The three quickly run off to go see what's up, but before the fight happens though, Kyle tries to warn Cartman that Dr. Nelson is a karate black belt, but after Nelson announces he'll beat Cartman to prove his point, which is words shouldn't hurt him, well, the two begin to wrestle, and Cartman easily gets the upper hand despite the doctor's training. Later in Washington, D.C., the N-word guys are pleading their case to the Senate to ban that term altogether. The motion is quickly passed too, and as a result, anyone saying the N-word and the word guy within 7 words of each other will be prosecuted and fined by the government. Back in the park, Dr. Nelson gives up after being pinned by Cartman, who forces him to submit by saying uncle and Carol Ann don't go into the light. As Cartman gloats about his victory, Dr. Nelson rises and kicks Cartman to the ground. However, Cartman remains unfazed and continues to laugh, and angered Dr. Nelson just storms off anyway, saying he proved his point even though he didn't, which all the students don't even know what the point is anymore. It is then that Stan understands that he doesn't get it either. He tells Token that he will never understand how it feels to have the N-word used against him because he isn't black, which is what Token was looking to hear all along. In the end, this was another great effort by the crew at South Park, and it proved once again that these guys are often ahead of their time. I wonder if Matt or Trey ever thought this issue would come up again over 10 years later. Regardless, they made this timeless episode which makes some great points about everything. I love this Wheel of Fortune setup, the reactions to it, and even the fighting between Cartman and Dr. Nelson, the little guy. All in all, this episode was a lot of fun, but I can't help but wonder if they would make this now, would something like this fly in 2019? What do you guys think? Did South Park do the N-word justice? Should white people be shamed to death if they say this term, even accidentally? And do you think people will get attacked and criticized for it in the future, like what's happened with PewDiePie and Sargon of Akkad recently? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. We'll see y'all next time.